HalDag. Halberd and dagger. Halberd in the main hand, dagger in the offhand. Is a fundamental setup that people might see and consider very sweaty. But I can assure you, it's not the most optimal way to play the game by a long shot. However, I consider it a very optimal way to learn the game, and I think it's worth studying. Hi, I'm a mad one, and I've been studying HalDag for the last little bit. I've been doing so on a strength build because that's currently my most complete and optimized build, but you can practice HalDag on any build, Dex, Int, Faith, a combination thereof. But I've been doing it on a strength build, and so I've chosen the Cincadea as my dagger. And the Banished Knight Halberd is just a good all-rounder. You can put it on pretty much any build, very low stat requirements, very good range, very good damage. The reason I've been practicing HalDag is because I need to get better at Elden Ring Teeth. Oh, I don't need to, but I really want to. And so that's what I've been focused on. And I think that the fundamental skills in PvP, like the spacing you're about to see here, are best practiced on a setup that is suboptimal. If you kill your opponent too quickly, you don't have a chance to learn anything. You know what I'm saying? So, I think, HalDag is really good for learning how to play around neutral, which is something that I've always been rather afraid of because I have a very poor reaction time and don't really know what to do with myself other than aggress. I don't play footsie very well, and I don't whiff punish very well because I'm bad at spacing, because I haven't put the time in, and because I'm bad at reading, because I don't know what all my opponent might do. I don't have a catalog of options for them to perform like I would a boss. A boss has a very specific move set, but an opponent is a wily thing. And I must admit, I found some success in learning how to play a better neutral. I found some success in learning how to whiff punish better. And I found some success in learning how to read my opponent. But it feels like I'm starting from the ground up. I used to consider myself very good at this game's PvP because I was able to dominate the arena with my goofy builds. For the most part, there were players who I just considered significantly better than me, who now in retrospect may not have been so much better than me as much as more well-equipped to play the game correctly. I've said before that it's very unintuitive to learn how to play Elden Ring, and the PvP is no exception. I told a friend once that it's more important to learn what not to do than it is to learn what to do when it comes to getting better at this game's PvP. This is because most options that you can do during a fight are suboptimal regardless of your build, regardless of your setup. You can be on the best build with the best weapon and still play it incorrectly by doing things that you shouldn't be doing. More so than not doing things that you should be doing. One thing that I shouldn't be doing is using my halberd so much. I'm very afraid of my opponent not being stunned by my hits, and I've yet to adopt fully the mindset that is whiff punishing with the dagger. This isn't supposed to be a video about how to play HalDag, for the record. There's a much better video than one that I can create by Dark Soap called HalDagger Guide. I'll link it in the description for anyone who wants to learn. But it's obtuse and requires that you just innately understand certain things like what priority is and how to space, which in theory I know how to space. In theory I know how to play around latency. In theory I know how to play unlocked and do mix-ups. But I have yet to intuit how to incorporate that into my actual gameplay. But it's something that I feel myself slowly becoming more attuned to as I continue to play HalDag. Of course, I can't resist the urge to backstab fish. and that's definitely not part of the playstyle. But the game's about having fun, and I have my most fun when I feel myself improving. I should certainly hope that anyone who watches this video also wants to improve. And to that end, I'm going to define the terms regarding the fundamentals of PvP. I'm going to define spacing, I'm going to define unlocked play, I'm going to define latency and how to play around it, and I'm going to define mix-ups, because anything's a mix-up if you haven't done it yet, but there's a difference between a mix-up and an effective mix-up. Starting with spacing. Spacing is the art and the skill of dancing just outside of your opponent's range, so that when they swing their weapon they will whiff, and you have the opportunity to, during the recovery animation of their swing, punish them with an attack. Unlocked play is not self-defining. It's not the refusal to lock on, but rather it is the decision to primarily stay unlocked from your opponent, locking on only when it benefits you. With thrusting weapons, it's very important to learn how to play unlocked because of strafing. It's very easy to strafe thrusting weapons like halberds, spears, great spears, and heavy thrusting swords, as well as thrusting swords, but they come out fast enough that you can just kind of mash. But the art of starting up an attack, angling your character towards where your opponent's likely going to be, and then locking on at the last second to ensure that your hit connects, is unlocked play. Latency is the time it takes the internet to convey information between two connections, and is often confused with lag. Lag is a failure of the internet to convey information between two connections, and will result in skipping, inconsistent connection, ice skating, and your opponent being able to hit you no matter where you're standing in the arena because your character's location failed to update on their screen. Having Wi-Fi connections instead of LAN cables can result in lag. Having shoddy internet providers, or internet providers that do not provide hardline internet access through cable or fiber optics, so satellite internet providers, will give you lag. But latency is consistent, and that's the beautiful thing about it. Once you have a measurement for latency, you can plan and play around it, although it's very unintuitive. To play around latency, you have to figure out how to measure the amount of time it takes the internet to convey your information. This is where you see people using throwing knives in the arena frequently at the start of fights. It's because when you hit the opponent with your throwing knife, it will take a second for your hit confirm to appear, and if they're not in iframes, any damage to appear. And once you have that measurement, you can assume that your opponent is that much time in the future on their screen compared to yours. If they are moving in a direction, they are that much further in time on their trajectory. If they're swinging their weapon, they are that much further in their weapon swing animation than it would appear on your screen. Meaning you can walk into their swing a certain bit, depending on the latency, and be unharmed because on their screen that weapon swing has already finished and they're in recovery animation. Latency scales with the distance between two people on the globe. So if I'm in America and my opponent is in Australia, there's going to be a lot of latency. And it also has to do with the protocols that convey the information through the internet. So it's often seen that Brazilian players have a lot of latency with American players, and other South American players have a lot of latency with American players, not only due to the distance, but due to the internet protocols that handle those connections. And finally, mix-ups are pretty much, in this game, whether or not you go for a roll catch. And I'm being reductive there. Mix-ups are inconsistent gameplay, not doing the same thing over and over again. so that your opponent doesn't know how to plan around what you're going to do next. It's probably the only thing that I really excel with. You can never really expect what I'm going to do because I don't know the meta, so I'm not always going to do the meta picks. Oftentimes I have won or lost a fight after hearing my opponent say, "Why would you do that?" Because it doesn't make any sense to do it, but it worked because it was a mix-up. One thing that I need to stop doing is follow-up attacks with my halberd. I need to follow up all my attacks with my dagger, or a roll. But I'm just used to mashing R1 and going for what are called bait punishes, where you deliberately whiff an attack and then queue up a follow-up attack towards the end of your recovery so that your opponent comes in to try to whiff punish you and you trade instead. Or sometimes you get the frame priority and hit them without them hitting you. But sometimes they time their attack so that they hit you without you hitting them, so it's a double-edged sword and really shouldn't be relied upon. In order to make the most out of the HalDag moveset, I need to utilize spacing and mix-ups to consistently whiff punish my opponent primarily with the dagger, so that I can get chips, little bits of damage and poise damage that will eventually lead to a stun. This does not work very well against hyper armor, which is something that you get from weapons that have that property. More on that in a different video, maybe. Or go watch my long half-axe weapon showcase if you want a little bit more information. And then mixing it up with my halberd. I have to constantly account for latency. That's not a HalDag specific fundament. None of them are. But the latency thing is important no matter what weapon you're using or build you're using. The things to take away from HalDag are reading your opponent so that way you can know when to poise chip with that dagger. Then doing that enough times that you can get a stun. Which means playing around latency and consistently hitting your opponent with a dagger in PvP, which is no easy feat, especially with all of the armor and poise and hyper armor and range that other weapons have. And then having that halberd in the offhand to scare them off, keep them at distance, which is not something that you really want because you have to get close to hit them with a dagger, but it is something that you want because you don't want them to hit you. And then occasionally mixing in halberd attacks, as seen in the HalDagger guide video by Darksoap. The sideways attacks, the free-aimed running attacks, etc. To keep your opponent on their toes and not willing to just mash into your dagger spam. Another key thing about the dagger is that it can eat inputs and cause aim punch. This is because there's just a bug in the code where having a dagger causes your opponent, when your opponent takes damage or when you take damage, two things can happen. Your input can get eaten if it's entered the moment you take damage, which the dagger hits very fast, so there's a lot of instances of damage. And aim punch happens when you take damage during an attack that you poise through hyper armor or regular poise. And your weapon's hitbox just goes all wonky. No one really knows why it happens, only that it happens, and it's important to be considerate of. So, the dagger is a very useful tool for mitigating what your opponent can do. If you get a chance to spam your dagger a couple times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, you should take it, especially if your opponent doesn't have a lot of poise. Your halberd, you should really avoid using, except for when it makes sense. When your opponent's about to roll away and you know you won't be able to catch them with the dagger. When you need to break neutral but you don't want to get too close, so you use a down-aimed running attack, as seen in Darksoap's HalDagger guide. And otherwise, you should really just focus on using the dagger. And most importantly, you should focus on being patient. That's the most important skill that HalDag is teaching me, is how to be patient and neutral. Without patience, you can't get the dagger chips. Without the dagger chips, you can't get the stun. Without the stun, you can't open your opponent up for mix-ups from your halberd. And without opening your opponent up for mix-ups from your halberd, you can't reasonably do a lot of damage because it's a dagger. Otherwise, you're just using a dagger, you know? And if you want to just use a dagger, you should just use a dagger. I don't think that you have as much to gain from trying to learn how to play the game by using a dagger. But I do think you have a lot to gain from learning to be patient in using a dagger. Y'all have a good day. Be safe.